Hello, darkness, my old friend. Did you know fairies and ghosts love the dark? Ink black nights with a little moonlight and no streetlights. Well, they are their favourites. Imagine our ancestors walking or riding after sundown, totally vulnerable to all the things lurking within that darkness. And, as you're about to discover in these stories, there was no safety in numbers. These fairies and ghosts were bold and dangerous. G'day, I'm Kitty. Welcome to Fairy Encounters. In 1895, American folklorist Jeremiah Curtin was travelling Ireland collecting folk and fairy stories, and at one point in his travels he stopped at the little fishing village of Dingle in the southwest corner of County Kerry. Well, here he stayed in the upper story of a well-to-do farmhouse, and his room overlooked a crossroads with windows looking out over both directions. His host was one of those people who knew everyone and their dog in the district, so Curtin found himself in the middle of everything, observing people of the district in their comings and goings of a daytime, and of an evening his well-connected host invited people to come and meet with Curtin every single night to share with him their personal fairy and ghost stories from the district. This sounds like a dream job for me, honestly. I swoon at the thought of doing this. Staying in a farmhouse near Dingle, oh my goodness, talking to people about their experiences. Well, you know what they say about dreams. You've got to have a dream. If you don't have a dream, how are you going to have a dream come true? And I believe that too. But now let's get back to Curtin. The stories that Curtin collected are fantastic. And in this video, I'm going to share a few of the best with you. But before we begin, I hope you're all getting nice and comfy, warm and calm, because things are about to get creepy. Now, I have no doubt that these stories were born of real sightings and encounters, but it's possible that a few have been expanded or embellished over the years of telling, as is the way of sharing scary stories. We'll see what you think, and I'll see you on the other side. There was a girl in Cloghane whose name was Mary Shea. She married and had 3 children, 1 son and 2 daughters. Her husband died, then his people turned against her and began to quarrel with the widow. Mary was a quiet, good woman and didn't like trouble. So she told her brother-in-law that if he would give her money to go to America with her 2 girls, she would give up the bit of land that she had and leave the little boy with himself till she would send for him. The brother-in-law and the other family made up the money, and she went away and was doing well in America for about 12 months, and then she took a fever and died. The very same week that the mother died, the girls sent money home for their brother. They wanted to send it while the mother was sick, but they waited to know would she get better. But sadly she died and was buried. About 2 weeks after the woman's death, a girl in Cloghane was going home one evening to Castle Gregory for Seamoss. Walking along, she saw a woman ahead and hurried on to have company and shorten the road for herself. The woman ahead seemed in no hurry and waited, and as they walked along, the woman asked where was she going, and she told her, and she asked her, "Do you know me?" "I do not," said the girl, "but I think I have seen you." "Didn't you know Mary Fitzgerald?" "Oh, I did. And when did you come home?" "About 2 weeks ago." "Isn't it the wonder that your mother in Cloghane doesn't know that you are here?" "I was in Cloghane," said she, "and saw them all, and 'tis badly they are treating my little boy. But 'twill not be long that way. He will go to his sisters in America. I died 2 weeks ago. But don't be in dread of me, for I'll do you no harm. I wanted you to speak to me so I could tell you what to do. When you go home tomorrow, go to my mother and tell her that I died in America and that you saw me on this strand, that I am walking back and forth, perishing with the cold. Tell her to buy a pair of shoes and stockings and give them to some poor person in my name, for God's sake." Mary was talking a long time to this girl, and the girl did promise to go to the mother. It seemed that whatever Mary's son did, his uncle whipped him, and the boy was crying in the daytime and crying at night in bed, the night that Mary came first to Cloghane. Everybody in the house was silent except the boy, and he was crying. The mother walked in, bent over him, laid her hand on his shoulder and said, "Don't be crying, my poor little boy. You'll be with your sisters very soon. You'll not see your mother any more, but you'll be happy without her." He sat up in the bed, knew her at once, and grasping at her, let such a screech out of him that it roused the uncle and grandmother, and he told them what he'd seen. The very next day, a letter came from America with news of the mother's death. Just after the girl came to the house and was telling about the shoes, that's when the letter was brought in. The mother bought a pair of shoes and gave them to a poor woman for God's sake and the good of Mary's soul. And Mary was seen on the strand no more after that. In the year 1846, Tom Connors was working on the road between Slayhead and Ventry with some other men. One morning, he asked a fellow workman for some tobacco. "I have only enough to last through the day," said the other, "but here are 3 pence for you, and at breakfast time take your bread and walk up the road, and you'll find an old woman selling tobacco. When you are paid next time, give back the 3 pence to me then." "Very well," said Connors, and when it was breakfast time, he took his bread and went along the road eating till he came to where the old woman was and bought the tobacco. Before the next payday, the man who loaned the 3 pence fell ill. Connors carried the money in his pocket a long time, hearing each day that the man was getting better and expecting that he would see him the next day. One morning, Connors was going to his work and had reached the bridge this side of Raheen. Just beyond that, he saw the man who loaned him the money, and he coming toward him. The man was so near that Connors put his hand in his vest pocket and took out the 3 pence for to pay him. But just then, The man sprang on a ditch at right angles with the road and walked along it, over a bog. Connors started to call to him, but then stopped and watched and saw the man jump from the ditch and cross a field. Then he went behind a small mound, and that was the last of him. Connors walked on a short distance and met two men going to work. He saluted them and asked what news had they. "So-and-so died," said they, "just before we left the house." This was the man who loaned Connors the threepence and had just crossed the bog. Connors said nothing to the two men about seeing him at the time, but the eyes were leaving his head. He was in such amazement. Later, he gave the threepence to some poor persons and told them to pray for the man. 50 years ago, it was a common thing to have dances wherever a fiddler happened to stop, and in those days, strolling fiddlers were seen often. When Tom Connors, the man I just mentioned, was young and unmarried, he found one evening that all the young people had gone away to a dance, so he went on alone to Rahonan, for he thought it was there the dance was. But when he came to the place, he was told that it was in the next village. Connors started off towards the village without waiting. The place was lonely, and he had gone only a short distance past a forge by the wayside when he saw a woman following him. Thinking that she was some girl going to the dance and that he could chat with her, he waited till she was near. He saw then that she was a girl who had died some time before, and he had danced with her often while she was in this world. He turned into a field to go by a shortcut to the village, and she followed. He said nothing, but hurried as much as he could, but she was always close behind. Not saying a word, she was waiting for Connors to speak to her. When he reached the house where the dance was, young men and women were standing outside. The dead girl was right there behind him. He was terribly frightened. Pressed in between the people and the house, he stood with his back to the wall. She went around and passed between the people and Connors, passed so near him that her clothes brushed his breast and her eyes looked into his eyes. Still, he didn't speak to her. Then she went away across the field and disappeared. The following things happened about 60 years ago. In those times, people used to go 9 and 10 miles to Mass, especially of a Christmas day. 4 men in the parish of Drummond went to Mass on Christmas and didn't start for home till after nightfall. The 4 were a young master with his servant boy and 2 married men, small farmers. When they came to a certain side path, the young master with his servant boy turned in there to go home, while the 2 others kept following the main road. The men on the road were not far away when they heard a wild screech in the field. "What can that be?" asked one. "Something must be happening. The night is dark." They heard then a second screech, but went on without stopping. Next morning, a messenger came to inquire where did they leave the young master and the servant boy, and the men said, "We left them when they turned from the main road to go home through the field." "They didn't come," said the messenger, "and I'm in dread they are killed." All the neighbours went to search for the two and found the young man dead, a long distance out from the path, and he black and blue, as people are always when killed by ghosts or fairies. But they couldn't find the servant boy high or low. The father of the young man sat up waiting all the night before for his son. About midnight, he heard a terrible wind blowing around the house outside. He rose, bolted the door, and sat down by the fire again. A few minutes later, there was a great struggle in front of the house and a noise as of someone making a kick at the door to open it. This was the servant boy who came to the house before the ghost and tried to break in. When he couldn't move the door, he ran to the hag gate where there were 2 stacks of hay. He sprang to one of the stacks to climb up and defend himself from the top of the stack. The ghost pulled him down, but he brought his 2 fists full of dry hay with him. The ghost drove him out of the hag gate and hunted him through 7 fields to a river. Next day, he was found on the riverbank, dead, and he all black and blue. His suspenders broke, and he would never have been killed but that they broke, because the cross on his back made by the suspenders would have saved him. His 2 fists were still grasping the hay. About 10 years later, this very same ghost, a woman, attacked a man who was out late and was coming home with a hatchet on his shoulder and a saw in his hand. The man used the saw well, striking her with it, and she couldn't get at him through the steel. She knocked 3 or 4 falls out of him, but he rose each time. She struck one of his eyes, and he lost the use of it. At last, after a great struggle, he came to a place where a stream of water was running across the land, and he knew she couldn't follow him through that, for no ghost can follow a person through water. And when he reached the other side, he stood and looked at her. "You have yourself saved. You are a strong man, the best that came before me since I killed such and such a man 10 years ago," said she, mentioning the servant boy and the master. "But if I haven't the better of you yet, you have a keepsake from me that will stay with you." The man went home, took to the bed, and didn't live 6 months. He was pining away every day till he died. Some time later, a man was drowned in Waterville, and he was one of the 2 farmers who came on Christmas night from Mass with the master and the servant boy that were killed. Well, 3 months after this man's death, his wife went with her brother matchmaking in the town. The brother settled a match between herself and a man living in Drummond Parish, which is over the mountains from Cursivene. She got marriage quittance from the priest in Cursivene, paid 10 shillings for it, and put it in her pocket. That evening, she and the brother started to go to the house of a friend who lived next door to the man that she was going to marry, for it's there that the wedding was to be. She kept the marriage quittance in her pocket. When they were about halfway, it commenced to snow, and when they were half a mile from the house, She began to fall every minute. "What is the matter?" asked the brother. "My first husband is killing me," said she. The brother tried his best to save her, but no use. He got blows enough himself and saw nobody. At last he took off his coat. He had a stick in his hand, and he struck the stick down in the ground and hung the coat on it to mark the place, for the land all around was white from snow. He left his sister there and ran to the friend's house. The house being no more than a quarter of a mile away, to bring help and to save the sister. When the two came with a few more neighbours, the woman was dead, and the place for 10 perches around was torn up as though with a horse and plough. All the people said, and the priest himself agreed with them, that it was against the rules for the woman to carry the marriage quittance, and if the brother had carried it, the ghost would have spared them both. I knew a man named Tom Moran who lived a few miles from Cursivene. I knew Tom and his wife very well, but at the time my story begins, Tom wasn't married. One time he was kept late in town by the shoemaker, and on the road home he met a strange priest on horseback. The priest stopped him. "Why are you out so late, my good man?" asked the priest. "'Tis in your bed you should be. The night outside belongs to the dead, and the house to the living." "Why are you outside yourself?" asked Tom. "'Tis my business to be out at all times," said the priest. "Is it often you are out at night?" "It is then," said Tom. "Go home now," said the priest. "The night is no time for travelling." When Tom came home, he put his white horse outside in a little field so as to be able to put his hands on him easily and have no delay in the morning, for he was to go to the strand very early for seaweed. He wasn't long in bed when he heard the horse galloping around the house and making a great noise. Tom ran out in his shirt to see what the trouble was, but if he did, he couldn't come near the horse. It was out on the road, and Tom after him in shirt and bare feet. Tom followed it till he came to a very lonesome place at the side of a graveyard, which was about 2 miles from his own house. The horse turned in there, and Tom followed closely till they came to a field where the horse disappeared, and no wonder, for the field was full of men and horses. Tom stepped aside into a corner, and all the crowd moved from the field and went past him towards the road. When they went out, the road was covered with people and horses moving towards Cursivene. Then all at once they shot away quickly, and Tom came home alone. He found his horse in the field where he had put him at first. It was a fairy horse that had gave him the turn into the graveyard. Some time after this, Tom Moran married in this parish, but his wife died in 12 months after the marriage. It must have been 9 or 10 months after her death. Tom was going home one night from Cursivene. He had been matchmaking all day to know if he could find a new wife, and he wasn't above a quarter of a mile from the town when he met the dead woman. "You are here, you ruffian," said she. "Isn't it soon for you to be marrying again?" You didn't give time for my footprints to leave the puddle in the yard, or the hair to fall from my head in the grave before you are looking for a second wife. But I'll pay you well tonight for your conduct." She went at him then and knocked him down, but he rose up and walked on. She made after him and took another fall out of him. "Now," said she, "if I don't take a third fall out of you before you go to Needham's gate, you will be saved. But if I do, you are done for." Just at the gate she knocked him a third time and then left him. Tom made his way home and sent for the priest and told him everything that had happened. He told the neighbours as well. He didn't live more than 3 or 4 days after that. My husband, Martin Doyle, was at work on an estate at some distance from Sneem, and one evening the gentleman who employed Martin told him to go that night on an errand to Sneem. "Well," said he, "it's too late, and the road is very lonesome. There is no one to care for my mother but me, and if anything should happen to me, she'd be without support. So I'll go, but in the morning." "That will not do," said the gentleman. "I want to send a letter, and it must be delivered tonight." "I'll not risk it. I'll not go," said Martin. Now Martin had a cousin, James, who heard the conversation, and stepping up, he said, "I'll go. I'm not afraid of ghost or spirit, and many a night have I spent on that road." The gentleman thanked him and said, "Here is a sword for you, if you need it." Then gave James the letter with directions for delivering it. So James started off and took every shortcut and bypath, and when he thought he was about halfway to Sneem, a ghost stood before him in the road and began to make at him. Whenever the ghost came near, James made a drive at him with the steel sword, for there is great virtue in steel, and above all in steel made by an Irish blacksmith. The ghost was darting at James, and he driving at the ghost with his sword till he came to a crossroad near Sneem. There the ghost disappeared, and James hurried on with great speed to Sneem. There he found that the gentleman who was to receive the letter had moved to a place 6 miles away, near Blackwater Bridge, halfway between Sneem and Kenmare. That place has a very bad name to this day, and old people declare that there is no night without spirits and headless people being around Blackwater Bridge. James knew what the place was, but he made up his mind to deliver the letter. When he came to the bridge and was going to cross it, a ghost attacked him. This ghost had a venomous look and was stronger than the first one. He ran twice at James, who struck at him with a sword. Just then he saw a big man without a head running across the road at the other side of the bridge and up the cliff. Though there was no path there, the ghost stopped attacking and ran after the headless man. James crossed the bridge and walked a little farther on when he met a stranger, and the two saluted each other. And the man asked James where he lived, and he said, "I came from Drumfarda." "Do you know what time it is?" asked James. "I do not, but when I was passing that house just below there, The roosters were beginning to crow. "Did you see anything?" "I did," said James, and he told him how the ghost attacked him and then ran away up the cliff after the headless man. "Oh," said the stranger, "that headless body is always roaming around the bridge at night. Hundreds of people have seen it. It ran up the cliff and disappeared at the rooster's crow. And the ghost that attacked you followed when the roosters crowed." The stranger then went on, and James delivered the letter. The man who received it was very thankful and paid him well. James came home safe and sound, but he did say, "I'd be a dead man this day, but for the steel." "About 30 years ago," said the old man, "there lived in a village near Rahanain Castle a man named James Kevane, a stepbrother of my own, and he married a woman called Elizabeth Shea. Now 3 or 4 nights after her second child was born, Kevane's wife, who was attended by her own mother and her mother-in-law, woke and saw the bed on fire. She called to the mother, who was there at the bedside but had fallen asleep. The mother sprang up and, turning towards the hearth, saw a cat with the face of a man on her, and was much frightened, but she had no time to look longer at the cat. When she had the fire quenched, she looked for the cat, but not a trace of her could they find in the house, and they never caught a sight of her again. 2 days later, the young child died, and 3 or 4 days after that, the woman had a terrible pain in her foot. It swelled to a great size, and where the swelling was, the skin looked like the bark of a tree. The poor woman suffered terribly. They sent for the priest many times and spent money for masses. They offered one priest £20 to cure her, but he said that if all the money in the kingdom were offered, he would have nothing to do with the case. He was afraid, you see, of getting a fairy stroke himself. The foot was swelling always, and it was that size that a yard of linen was needed to go once around it. The poor woman was 1.5 years in this way, and towards the end she said that horses and carriages were moving around the house every night. The mother went to an old woman, a herb doctor, and begged her to come and cure her daughter if she could. "I can cure her," said the woman, "but if I do, you must let some other one of your family go in place of her." Now, as all the sons and daughters were married and had families of their own, the mother said she had no one she could put in place of this daughter. Kevane's wife used to raise herself up by a rope which was put hanging above the bed. Then, when she was tired and she could hold it no longer, she would lie down again. This woman remained in suffering like this till a week before she died. She told her friends that it was no use to give her remedies or pay money for masses to benefit her, that it wasn't herself that was in it at all. You see, on the night that the mother saw the cat with a man's face and she sitting on the hearth, Kevane's real wife was taken by the fairies and put in Rahanain Castle to nurse a young child. Nobody could tell who the sick woman was, but whoever she was, she died, and the body was so swollen and drawn up that the coffin was like a great box, as broad as 'twas long. About a year after the funeral, Pat Mahoney, who worked for a hotel keeper in Dingle, went to a fair in Listowel. At the fair, a strange man came up to Mahoney. "Where do you live?" asked the man. "In Dingle," said Pat Mahoney. "Do you know families named Shay and Kevane?" "I do," said Mahoney. "Kevane's wife died about 12 months ago." "Well," said the strange man, "I have a message for you to the parents of that woman, Elizabeth Shay. She is coming to my house for the last 9 months. She comes always after sunset. She lives in a fairy fort that is on my land." This is how we discovered the woman about 9 months ago. Potatoes and milk were put out on the dresser for one of my servants who was away from home, and before the man came, this woman was seen going to the dresser and eating the potatoes and drinking the milk. She came every evening after that for about a month before I had the courage to speak to her. When I spoke, she told me that her father, mother, husband and child were living near Rahane Castle. She gave every right token of who she was. "I spent," said she, 3 months in Rahane, at first nursing a child that was in it, but was taken after that to the fort on the place where I am living now in Lismore. I have not tasted food in the fort yet," said she, "but at the end of 7 years I'll be forced to eat and drink unless somebody saves me. I cannot escape unassisted." When Mahoney came home to Dingle, he went straight to tell the woman's friends all that the strange man had told him. She had told the man, too, how her friends must come with 4 men and a horse and car, and that she would meet them. Mrs. Kevane's father and brother and I and another neighbouring man offered to go to Lismore, but Kevane wouldn't go, for he had a second wife by this time. The following morning we started out and went to the parish priest to take his advice. He told us not to go and advised us in every way to stay at home. He was afraid, I suppose, that the woman might give the people too much knowledge of the other world. The other 3 men were stopped by the priest, and sure there was no use in me going alone, so I didn't. You know, Kevane's wife knew that her husband was married for a second time, for she sent word to him that she didn't care, that she would live with her father and her child. But then everybody forgot the whole affair for a couple of years. Then one day a retired policeman named O'Connor was going from Lismore to Dingle, and the woman appeared before him, saluted him, and asked was he going to Dingle. Well, he said he was. She told him then that if he wanted to do her any good or service, to go to her friends, and she gave him their names, and tell them that they had plenty of time yet to go and claim her, that she had not eaten fairy food so far. He promised to do as she asked. He reached Dingle soon after and told her friends what she had said. O'Connor, however, said he wouldn't tell them everything in full until they would promise to go. At this, the relations of Kevane's second wife went to O'Connor and bribed him to say nothing more. After that, he was silent, and once again people cared no more about the woman. The 7 years passed, and at the end of that time, Elizabeth Shay's father saw her one evening when he was coming home from market and was about a mile beyond Dingle. She walked almost a mile with him, but never said a word. At parting, she gave him a blow on the face, and on the following day he had to take to his bed and was blind for 7 or 8 years. He kept to his bed most of the time until he died. During the couple of days before he lost his sight, Shay saw the daughter come in and give a blow to her child, which died strangely soon after. Neither priest nor doctor could tell what ailment had been on the child. And about the time that the child died, Shay's second wife got sick and has not milked a cow nor swept the house since. She has not gone to mass or market these 20 years. She keeps the bed now and will keep it while she lives. She has no pain and is not suffering in any way, but is dead in herself, as it were. She had a fine young girl of a daughter, but she too got a blow and died 2 days after. She has 3 sons too, but Elizabeth Shay has never done them any harm. There was a farmer in the parish of Fairies whose name was John Coakley. John was a great man for every kind of new information and would go a long way of an evening to hear people read newspapers. But he didn't give in to stories or to what old people used to say. Coakley thought the house he had too small and wanted to put an addition to it. There was an old passage at one end of the house, and it's there that he was going to build this addition. Now John had a gossip friend named Moore who used to go with the fairies, and this man passed by when he was beginning the work. "What's that you are doing?" asked Moore. "Don't you see what I'm doing?" said Coakley. "Now, couldn't you put the addition to the other end of the house and leave this one alone?" asked Moore. "But that wouldn't suit me," answered John. "You should leave the passage open so that everyone could travel through it by day, and especially by night." "That's foolish talk," said Coakley. "Very well," said Moore. "You think so, I suppose, but my word for it, you may be sorry in the end." Coakley finished the addition and left a little hole in the wall near the fireplace, and it was there he kept his pipe and tobacco. It must be said there was no one smoking in that house but himself, and one night, on going to bed, he put an ounce of tobacco in the hole. In the morning, there was no bit of the tobacco left, but in place of it, the price, 3 halfpenny. He took great notice of that. A few weeks later, he rose from his bed in the night and heard a great noise of horsemen outside. He opened the door and looked out, but if he did, he saw nothing. He went to bed again and wasn't long there when he began to be sore and feel very sick in himself. Moore came to see him the next day. "Well, John," said he, "you feel sick today." "I do," said Coakley. "You had a right to stop in bed." "How well you know of that," said Coakley. "I do. That much could not be done unknown to me. When you turned back from the door last night, there was a crowd between you and the bed as big as at any fair. They gave you a warning this time, and you will recover." In a few weeks' time, Coakley was looking well again, but he got downhearted, took to drinking, and spent his means, so that at last he hadn't any cows on his land but what belonged to others. One May day, in the evening, he was going to a neighbour's to collect grazing money that was due to him, when about 3/4 of the way, and the time was after sunset, a woman appeared opposite and took a great fall out of him. He was thrown on his face in the middle of the road and struck senseless. In half an hour he recovered, rose and walked on, but after going a short distance he was knocked a second time, and soon after he got the third fall. Coakley didn't know for a full hour where he was. He hadn't his senses at all. When he came to himself, he was in the middle of the road, so he crawled to the side of it, then rose and went for his money. He didn't tell the man what had happened and made no delay, but hurried home and went to bed. He felt the strength parting from his body in the night and was without any power to move the next morning. His wife ran to doctors for cures, but no use for her. In a month's time, all the neighbours said that Coakley was fairy struck, and there was no cure for that. The wife went one day to Killarney, where she met with Moore the gossip. "John is very bad again," said Moore. "He is," said she, "and there is no one to do good for him if you don't." "Oh, well," said Moore, "I have a son of my own to assist, and he is nearer to me than what John is. I must look out for myself. John was struck very severely, and he may thank himself for it. He was not said by me, or he wouldn't have built in the passage and wouldn't be where he is today. This is all the cure I can offer you. Go home, get a tub of water, and bathe John 9 nights with the one water, one night after another. When you have that done, you'll not throw out the water till after midnight, when all are in bed. Take care that no one of your family is out of the house that night." When John's wife was in the road coming back home, a man of the neighbours overtook her and they walked on together. There was a height within 1 mile of the house, and from this they had a fine view of Coakley's house and land. The time was after sunset, and to their surprise, they saw John himself walking around in the garden as well and as strong as ever. But when the wife came home, she found him in bed, sick and miserable. "Were you out since morning, John?" she asked. He only began to scold and look bitter at her. "How could a dead man leave the bed?" he said. She carried on and prepared the tub of water in the corner of the house that day, and was bathing him for 9 nights in the same water. Now she had a son, 15 or 16 years of age at that time, who was rarely at home. He spent a night out very often, for he was out working for people. She didn't think the boy would come home that night, as it was so late, about 1 o'clock in the morning, so she began to throw out the water with a gallon. There was a big flagstone outside the door, and she threw the water on that. She had all out but the last gallon, when who should come but the sun. When he stepped on the flagstone, he was thrown heels over head and his leg broken. There was no doctor nearer than Killarney, and when the mother went there the next day, she met with more. "Well," said he, "you are worse now than ever. Didn't I tell you not to throw out that water when there was anyone away from the house?" "He slept out so often," said the mother, "that I was sure he wouldn't come that night. You may thank your friends and neighbours of the other world for being so strong, or your son's brains would be knocked out on that flagstone. He'll not be long recovering." The washing did no good to John, but he'll not leave you yet. He's very far back in the ranks. He will not go from you till he'll be the front man. Don't take too much care of him, for he'll rob you. Every day he should be placed in a chair and brought to the fire between two persons. By looking at him, you'd think there was nothing amiss with the man. At that, Moore and the wife parted. Soon the neighbours stopped coming and didn't inquire after Coakley. They used to see John Coakley walking about the farm after sunset and before sunrise. They thought he was well again. Well, this went on for about 4 years, and Moore himself, who used to be with the fairies, left this world altogether. In the latter end, the wife couldn't give the sick man what food he wanted, and he became raging. He kept an appetite all the time. She had a third cousin, a priest, and this priest came to see her. "Oh, Father, can't you do some good for my husband? Myself and my poor children are beggared from him." "It isn't in my power to do good to that man," said the priest. "You must leave him there till he is taken from you." She told how the husband abused her, what a tongue he had. "Don't give him another tint of whiskey," said the priest, "nor meat, nor eggs. Just give him what you and your children have." The man gave a bitter look at the priest. The priest gave a good morning and went home. After this, the poor woman put no food before him but such as she and the children used. He was pining away and hadn't half the speech he had before, but he still called her all the names he could think of. If he could have killed her, he would. It continued on in this way till 1 month before 7 years were out, he pining, and she breaking her heart with poverty. In this month he was sleeping all the time, so they knew there was a change coming. One midnight they heard a great crowd racing around the house, a noise of horses and people about the crossroad, and hurricanes of wind with terrible noises. "Ah, I'll be going home soon," said he on the following morning. "I'm not sorry to leave you." "Would you like to have a priest, John?" asked the wife. "What would I do with a priest, woman?" The uproar continued 3 more nights, and on the 3rd evening he asked to eat, said he was starved. She gave him plenty of what she had, and he ate willingly, without a word at all. Later, herself and her son and the little family, 5 altogether, were talking, and in an hour's time, when they didn't hear any sound from him, they went to the bed and found that it's dead he was, and they were not sorry after him, and sure, why should they? For it wasn't John Coakley that was in it at all. Ooh, I hope you've enjoyed these creepy tales of fairies and ghosts. Join me next week for more true sightings and encounters. And if you'd like to support my channel, please consider becoming a member. Just click on the join button below to take a look. I'd really appreciate your support. Until next time, stay curious. Cheerio.